Asterisk. They thought driving humanity out of the galaxy would bring peace. They believed removing us would solve their problems. But when the last human ship vanished into the void, we left them with one final warning. And now the repercussions of that warning have begun. Asterisk, the banishment. The grand assembly hall stretched upward into darkness, its ceiling lost somewhere in the shadows above. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the chamber, their forms as varied as the stars themselves. Some breathed methane, others existed as clouds of luminescent gas. A few were simply minds housed in crystalline structures that pulsed with thought. Captain James Reeves stood at the center of it all, a single human surrounded by the judgment of ancient civilizations. He was not a diplomat. He was a soldier who had fought in 3 colonial wars and survived encounters that should have killed him. His face carried scars from a mining accident on Titan, and his hands were calloused from years of manual labor before he ever wore a uniform. The assembly had not wanted to hear from Earth's politicians or philosophers. They wanted someone who represented what humanity truly was, and James represented survival. The speaker of the assembly rose from the central platform. Her name was unpronounceable in human terms, but she was called Verithan by those who could not manage her true designation. She belonged to the Kaldori, a species that had ruled their corner of space for 12 million years. To them, humanity's entire existence was less than a heartbeat. Captain Reeves, Verithan's voice, echoed through translation devices embedded in every seat. Your species has been granted the opportunity to address this assembly before final judgment is passed. Speak now, or accept our decision in silence. James looked up at the thousands of eyes watching him. Some held curiosity, others contempt, most held indifference. To them, humanity was a problem to be solved, nothing more. Honored members of the assembly, James began, his voice steady despite the weight pressing down on him. We came to you 50 years ago with open hands and honest hearts. We asked only for a place among you to learn from your wisdom and share what little we had discovered. You welcomed us, but only as children are welcomed, patted on the head and told to be quiet while the adults spoke. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Verithan's expression did not change, but her skin shifted from pale blue to deep violet. A sign of displeasure among her people. James continued. We have followed every law you placed upon us. We limited our expansion to the territories you assigned. We paid the taxes you demanded. We sent our brightest minds to your universities and our strongest workers to your construction projects. And in return, you have decided we are too dangerous to exist among you. You grow too quickly. A voice boomed from the upper levels. It belonged to High Counselor Brath, a massive creature with 6 arms and eyes that glowed like coals. In 50 years, your population has tripled. Your ships multiply like insects. Your colonies spread across every rock you can find. You consume resources faster than any species we have ever encountered. We grow because we must, James replied. Our homeworld is dying, not from war or plague, but from simple exhaustion. We have 7 billion souls who need homes, and you gave us 12 barren moons and 3 asteroid belts. We made them livable through hard work and sacrifice. Is that a crime? Your ambition is the crime, Verithan said coldly. Every species that has grown as rapidly as yours has either collapsed into civil war or become a threat to all others. The Assembly exists to prevent such outcomes. We have maintained peace in this galaxy for longer than your world has existed. We will not allow one reckless species to undo eons of stability. James felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice level. You call us reckless, but we have never attacked another species. You call us dangerous, but we have shared every discovery we made with this assembly. You fear what we might become, not what we are. Precisely, Verithan acknowledged. Prevention is always wiser than cure. The assembly has voted. Humanity will vacate all territories within civilized space within 18 standard months. You will take your ships, your stations, and your people beyond the outer rim. You will not return. Any human vessel found within assembly jurisdiction after the deadline will be destroyed without warning. The pronouncement, fell like a hammer. James had known this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. 18 months to evacuate hundreds of colonies, to pack up the lives of millions of people, to abandon everything they had built. "You are making a mistake," James said quietly. The chamber fell silent. Even the constant whisper of translation devices seemed to pause. "Explain," Verithan commanded. James took a breath. 3 months ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected anomalies coming from the void, from the empty space between galaxies. Energy signatures unlike anything in our databases or yours. Patterns that suggest purpose and intelligence. We reported this to the Assembly Science Division. They dismissed it as instrument error. It was instrument error. Broth interrupted. Our own scientists examined your data. Nothing exists in the void. It is empty space, hostile to all life. Your equipment malfunctioned. Our equipment did not malfunction, James insisted. Something is coming from the void, something vast and purposeful. We do not know what it is or when it will arrive, but every projection suggests it will reach assembly space within the next century. When it comes, you will need every ally you can find. Every mind working on solutions, every hand ready to defend what we have all built together. More human fantasy, Verithan dismissed with a wave of one slender hand. You invent threats to make yourselves seem necessary. The void has been studied for millions of years. It is empty. It will remain empty. James looked around the chamber one final time. He saw closed minds and ancient pride. He saw civilizations so old they had forgotten how to adapt, so comfortable in their power they could not imagine anything challenging it. Then we will go, he said simply. We will take our ships and our people beyond your borders. We will build new homes in the darkness where you refuse to look. But remember this moment. Remember that we warned you? When the darkness comes, and it will come, you will wish you had listened. He turned and walked toward the exit. His footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. No one spoke. No one moved. The human had delivered his warning and his judgment, and now he was leaving with dignity intact. Behind him, Verithan spoke to the assembly. Let the human words be recorded and forgotten. The threat was empty, born of desperation. Humanity will depart, and the galaxy will be safer for their absence. This session is concluded. The great doors closed behind James. Outside, the human delegation waited. They had watched the proceedings through monitors. They had seen hope die. It's done then, said Mr. Chen, Earth's senior representative. They won't change their minds. James shook his head. No, they won't. Send word to all colonies. Begin the evacuation. We have 18 months to save everyone we can. And the warning? Chan asked. About the void? James looked out through the station's viewing port at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, in the darkness between galaxies, something waited. He could feel it in his bones, the way sailors once felt approaching storms. They will learn, he said softly. When we are gone and the darkness comes, they will remember. And they will regret. The human delegation departed the assembly station that day. Behind them, the civilizations of the galaxy celebrated their wisdom in removing a dangerous element. They returned to their ancient routines, confident in their superiority and blind to the storm gathering in the void. Humanity began the long journey into exile, carrying with them the knowledge that they had tried to warn their neighbors and been rejected. That rejection would shape everything that came after. The darkness between stars, 50 years had passed since the evacuation. An entire generation of humans had been born who never knew what it meant to live under the Assembly's rule. They were children of the fringe territories raised on worlds with names like Hopes and New Horizon and Defiance. These were harsh places, planets the Assembly had deemed worthless. Too far from trade routes or too poor in resources to matter, but humans had made them home. Dr. Sarah. Mitchell stood in the observation dome of Research Station Kepler, watching ice crystals form patterns on the exterior glass. Beyond the frozen viewport, the dwarf star they orbited cast a dim red glow across the emptiness. this far out on the rim. Even the familiar constellations of assembly space were barely visible. Sarah was the granddaughter of refugees who had fled the core worlds during the evacuation. Her grandmother had told her stories about Earth, about blue skies and oceans that stretched to the horizon. Sarah had never seen Earth. She had been born here in the cold and the dark. And she had learned to love it. Dr. Mitchell, you need to see this. The voice came from her research partner, a young man named Marcus Webb, who had transferred from the mining colonies last year. His face on her communication screen was pale with worry. Sarah moved to the main laboratory, where holographic displays filled the air with data streams. Marcus gestured to the primary screen, showing readings from their deep space monitoring array. The anomalies Captain Reeves reported 50 years ago, Marcus said, his voice tight with tension. They're not anomalies anymore. They're here. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. For decades, human scientists had continued monitoring the void. The empty space between galaxies that the assembly insisted was lifeless. They had watched the energy signatures grow stronger, more focused, more purposeful. And they had prepared. The holographic display showed something emerging from the darkness beyond the galactic rim. It was massive, a formation of objects moving in perfect coordination. The sensors struggled to classify what they were detecting. Not ships exactly, but not natural phenomena either. Something in between. Something that defied easy definition. How long until they reach assembly space? Sarah asked. Marcus ran the calculations. At current velocity, 6 standard months. They're heading directly for the core worlds, following the densest concentrations of inhabited systems. Sarah activated the emergency communication protocol. Within minutes, she was connected to the Human Governing Council, a group of representatives from all the fringe colonies. They met in virtual space now. Their holographic forms gathered in a simulation of Earth's old United Nations chamber that none of them had ever actually seen. The threat Captain Reeves warned about is real, Sarah reported. It's heading for assembly territory. Whatever these things are, they're coming in force. And they're not slowing down. Chairman Victoria Cross, elected leader of the fringe territories, was a woman in her 70s who had survived the evacuation as a child. She had seen her parents die during the journey when their transport ship suffered catastrophic failure. That experience had made her both compassionate and ruthlessly practical. What do we know about these objects? She asked. Very little, Sarah admitted. They don't emit radiation signatures consistent with any known technology. They appear to absorb energy rather than generate it. Our preliminary analysis suggests they might be consuming stellar matter as they travel, growing stronger with each system they pass through. Has the assembly detected them? Another council member asked. Unknown, Sarah replied. Our monitoring capabilities are better than theirs in this region. We've been watching the void for 50 years while they dismissed it as empty. They might not know what's coming until it arrives. The council chamber fell silent. Everyone understood the implications. The assembly that had cast them out, that had called them dangerous and refused their warnings, was about to face exactly the threat humans had predicted. We should warn them, Victoria said quietly. Why? The question came from Counselor James Okonkwo, whose entire family had died during the evacuation, when assembly border patrols had fired on refugee ships they claimed were violating departure schedules. They exiled us. They threatened to destroy any human who returned. Why should we help them? Because it's the right thing to do, Victoria replied. And because if these things consume the assembly, they won't stop there. They'll keep coming, right to our doorstep. We help them because we help ourselves. The vote was close, but it passed. A warning would be sent to the assembly, along with all the data humans had collected about the approaching threat. Whether the assembly would listen was another question entirely. 3,000 light years away, in the heart of assembly space, Ambassador Kresh of the Caldori stood in the central command chamber of the Defense Coordination Network. Kresh had been a junior analyst 50 years ago when humanity was expelled. Now he commanded the assembly's entire military infrastructure. The warning from human space arrived during a routine briefing. At first, Kresh thought it was a mistake or perhaps a human attempt at sabotage. But the data was too detailed, too consistent with anomalies his own deep space sensors had begun detecting in recent weeks. Verify the source, Kresh ordered. Confirmed as coming from human territory, his aide reported. Research Station Kepler and the Fringe Territories. The data includes 50 years of continuous monitoring. Kresh studied the projections. If the human calculations were correct, something was coming that outweighed anything the assembly had faced in recorded history. The formations were massive, coordinated, and appeared to be deliberately targeting inhabited systems. Alert the High Council, Kresh said, and prepare the defense fleets. If this is real, we have very little time. The High Council convened an emergency session. Verithin was long dead, replaced by a new speaker named Telkor, who belonged to a species that communicated through color patterns across their crystalline bodies. The chamber was the same one where James Reeves had delivered his warning 5 decades earlier. The humans claim an invasion force approaches from the void, Telkor announced. They have provided data supporting this claim. The same humans we expelled for being dangerous? Counselor Brath asked. He was older now, his movements slower, but his voice retained its booming authority. This could be an elaborate deception, a pretext for them to return and demand concessions. Our own sensors confirm unusual readings, Kresh reported. The patterns match what the humans have been tracking. Whatever is coming, it is real and it is massive. The debate continued for hours. Some counselors wanted to dismiss the warning as human trickery. Others advocated for immediate military mobilization. In the end, caution won over pride. Deploy reconnaissance fleets to the outer rim, Telkor ordered. Confirm the threat. If it is real, we will respond with the full force of the assembly. And send a reply to the humans thanking them for the warning, though we require no assistance. The reconnaissance fleets departed within days, moving to intercept the approaching formations. They were composed of the assembly's finest ships, crewed by warriors from species that had defended the galaxy for millions of years. Their weapons could shatter planets, and their shields had never been breached. They lasted 17 minutes, the formations the humans called. The shadow swarm moved through the reconnaissance fleet like it did not exist. The assembly ships fired every weapon they had: antimatter torpedoes, quantum disruptors, gravitational lances that could tear apart asteroids. None of it mattered. The shadow entities absorbed the energy, grew brighter, and moved forward. Then they began to feed. The assembly ships were consumed, not destroyed, but absorbed. Their matter was broken down and incorporated into the swarm. Their energy signatures were added to the collective mass. By the time the last distress signal cut off, the reconnaissance fleet had become part of the threat. It was sent to investigate. News of the disaster spread through assembly space like wildfire. Panic erupted on worlds that had known peace for eons. Species that had never experienced real fear suddenly understood terror. The ancient civilizations that had dismissed humanity's warning were now facing the consequences of their arrogance. In the Defense Coordination Network, Ambassador Kresh watched system after system fall dark on the tactical displays. The shadow swarm was accelerating, growing stronger with each fleet it consumed, each station it absorbed. He opened a communication channel to the human fringe territories. The signal took hours to reach its destination, traveling across the vast distance between the assembly core and the outer darkness where humanity had been exiled. When the channel finally connected, Kresh found himself looking at Chairman Victoria Cross. She sat in a simple office with metal walls, nothing like the grand chambers of the assembly. But her eyes held a strength that Kresh recognized, the strength of someone who had survived when survival seemed impossible. "We need your help," Kresh said simply. Pride was a luxury the assembly could no longer afford. "The threat you warned us about is here, and we cannot stop it. Our fleets are being destroyed. Our worlds are falling. Please, if humanity has any capability to fight this enemy, we are asking for your aid." Victoria studied him in silence for a long moment. Somewhere behind her, Kresh could see technicians working at consoles. and he realized the humans were already mobilizing. "We will help you," Victoria said finally. "Not because you deserve it, but because this threat endangers everyone, including us. Our fleet will depart within the week. Tell your people to hold on. Humanity's coming." The transmission ended. Kresh sat alone in the command chamber, surrounded by displays showing the slow death of the civilization he had sworn to protect. The humans were coming, the species they had cast out into the darkness. Whether they would arrive in time, whether they had any hope of succeeding where the assembly had failed, he did not know. But for the first time since the Shadow Swarm had appeared, Kresh felt something other than despair. He felt hope. The Reckoning Commander Alex Torres stood on the bridge of the flagship, Resilience, and watched the human fleet assemble in the darkness beyond the last human outpost. 200 ships had gathered, every vessel the fringe territories could spare. They were not beautiful ships like the elegant cruisers of the assembly. They were built from salvaged materials, cobbled together from mining equipment, and repurposed colony transports. They looked like exactly what they were, the desperate tools of a people who had learned to survive with nothing. But appearances were deceiving. Alex was 35 years old, born in the fringe and trained in the harsh reality of frontier warfare. He had fought pirates, territorial disputes between colonies, and hostile alien fauna on a dozen worlds. His crew was the same, hardened by 50 years of living where the assembly refused to look. They had no illusions about glory or honor. They simply knew how to fight and how to survive. "All ships report ready," his executive officer announced. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Park had served with Alex for 10 years. She was calm under pressure and brutally honest, qualities Alex valued more than any medal or commendation. "Signal the fleet," Alex ordered. "We jump in 5 minutes. Everyone stays tight on our formation. No heroics, no breaking ranks. We go in together, we fight together, we come home together." The acknowledgments came back from 200 captains. Some were military veterans from the old evacuation days. Others were civilian volunteers who had never fired a weapon in anger. All of them understood what they were facing. The Shadow Swarm had consumed 12 assembly fleets in the past month. Entire star systems had gone dark. Billions of lives simply erased from existence. The human fleet jumped out the transition through, faster than light space, lasted subjectively only moments. But Alex knew that weeks of relative time were passing in normal space. When they emerged, they found themselves at the edge of assembly territory, exactly where Ambassador Kresh had requested they arrive. The tactical displays immediately filled with horror. 3 assembly defense fleets were engaged with the Shadow Swarm. Thousands of ships fighting desperately against an enemy that seemed to have no end. The swarm entities moved like living darkness, absorbing weapons fire and converting it into more mass. Every ship they destroyed became part of them. Every station they consumed added to their strength. "My God," Rachel whispered beside him. "There are so many." Alex had seen the reports and the projections. Nothing had prepared him for the reality. The swarm stretched across space like a storm cloud made of hatred and hunger. The assembly ships were fighting bravely, but they were losing. For every swarm entity they managed to dissipate, 10 more took its place. "All ships, this is Torres. Engage Protocol Nightfall. Target the feeding clusters. Hit them where they're actively consuming matter." The human fleet broke into smaller squadrons and dove toward the battle. The assembly ships detected them immediately, their sensors tracking the new arrivals with confusion. These crude human vessels were nothing like their own elegant warships. What could they possibly accomplish? The answer came swiftly. The human ships did not use conventional weapons. 50 years in the fringe had taught them hard lessons about survival. They had no access to antimatter or quantum technologies. Instead, they learned to weaponize what they had in abundance. Desperation and ingenuity dot the first squadron. Led by Captain Maria Santos and the converted freighter Defiant Hope, launched their payload. They were not missiles or energy beams. They were compressed packets of exotic matter that humans had learned to harvest from the boundary regions between normal space and the void itself. The assembly scientists had declared such matter impossible to contain. Human engineers had made it work anyway, through trial and error, and the kind of reckless innovation that comes from having nothing to lose. The packet struck the shadow, swarm entities, and did not explode. Instead, they unfolded. Reality itself seemed to twist around the impact points. The swarm entities that had been feeding on assembly ships suddenly found themselves pulled into pocket dimensions, spaces that existed sideways to normal reality. They could not absorb what they could not reach. They could not consume what was no longer fully present in their universe. The swarm reacted with something that might have been surprise, if such entities could feel surprise. They turned their attention from the assembly fleet to this new threat. These small crude ships that had somehow hurt them. Second wave. Launch, Alex commanded. More human ships swept forward, deploying different weapons. These were dimensional anchors, devices that locked small regions of space into rigid patterns. The swarm entities moved by folding space around themselves, flowing through reality like water through cracks. The anchors made that impossible, forcing them to become solid and vulnerable. Assembly gunships immediately exploited the opening, their weapons finally able to inflict real damage on enemies that had been rendered tangible. Swarm entities that had seemed invincible minutes before began to break apart under concentrated fire. On the assembly flagship Unity of Purpose, Ambassador Kresh watched in astonishment as the battle turned. The humans were not simply fighting the swarm. They were changing the rules of the engagement, using technologies and tactics the assembly had never imagined. How are they doing this? His tactical officer demanded. Where did they learn to manipulate dimensional boundaries? Kresh understood suddenly. They learned in the void. We sent them to die in empty space, and they survived by mastering the very emptiness we feared. They became experts in nothing, and now they are using that expertise against an enemy born from nothing. The battle raged for 18 hours. Human ships darted through the combat zone, deploying their exotic weapons and creating opportunities for assembly forces to strike. The coordination was imperfect. Communications were difficult between species that had not worked together in 50 years. But slowly, inexorably, the shadow swarm began to retreat, not because they were destroyed. The entities were too vast for that, but because they recognized the threat they could not easily overcome. The swarm had evolved to consume matter and energy in normal space. They had no defense against weapons that operated partially outside normal space. Weapons born from humanity's desperate exile in the darkness. When the swarm finally withdrew, pulling back toward the void from which it had emerged, the combined human and assembly forces did not pursue. They had won a battle, not a war. But they had proven something important. The shadow swarm could be fought. It could be hurt. It could be stopped. Alex stood on the bridge of resilience, exhausted and aching from 18 hours of constant command. His ship had taken damage, 3 of his squadrons had lost vessels, and he had personally watched brave people die fighting an enemy they barely understood. But they had survived. They had helped the assembly survive. The communication channel opened with an incoming signal from the assembly flagship. Ambassador Kresh's face appeared on the display, and Alex saw something in the alien's expression he had not expected. Respect. Commander Torres, Kresh said formally. On behalf of the assembly, I offer our profound gratitude. You saved countless lives today. You saved civilizations that have existed for millions of years. We are in your debt. Alex considered his response carefully. This was the moment that would define everything that came after. He could be gracious and accept the thanks. He could be angry and demand restitution for 50 years of exile. He could be political and extract concessions. Instead, he chose honesty. We did not come to save you because we had forgiven what was done to us, Alex said quietly. We came because it was necessary. The swarm threatens all life, including ours. We fought for ourselves as much as for you. But now that the immediate crisis has passed, we need to talk about the future. Kresh nodded slowly. What do you propose? The swarm will return. We hurt them today, but we did not destroy them. They will adapt, and they will come back stronger. When they do, you will need us again, not as servants or children to be tolerated, but as equals. As partners, you want full membership in the assembly, Crush said. It was not a question. We want what we should have been granted 50 years ago, Alex replied. Recognition that humanity has value. Representation in your councils. The right to exist without fear of being expelled when we become inconvenient. And we want an apology, not for our sake, but because the galaxy needs to learn that pride and fear are poor guides for policy. The communication channel was silent for a long moment. Alex could imagine the debates happening on the assembly flagship. The arguments about precedent and procedure and ancient traditions. Finally, Kresh spoke. The High Council will need to approve any such changes. But I will advocate for everything you have requested. You have earned it not through the battle today, but through 50 years of surviving what should have killed you. You have proven that exile did not destroy humanity. It made you stronger. No, Alex corrected gently. It made us different. Strength was always there. You just refused to see it. Over the following months, the political situation shifted dramatically. The Shadow Swarm had retreated but not vanished. They remained at the edge of known space, a constant reminder of the threat that had nearly destroyed the assembly. That threat made change possible. The High Council voted to grant humanity full membership status. Human representatives took seats in the assembly chamber, where James Reeves had once stood alone and rejected. Restrictions on human expansion were lifted. Technology sharing agreements were established. The exile was officially ended and formally apologized for. But the real change was deeper than politics. The assembly civilizations had spent millions of years believing their way was the only way, that their ancient wisdom was infallible. Humanity's survival in the void and their success against the swarm had shattered that certainty. Young aliens began to question old assumptions. Scientists started exploring ideas their species had dismissed as impossible. The rigid order that had defined the galaxy for eons began to bend toward something more flexible and more dynamic. In the fringe territories, now recognized as legitimate human sovereign space. Dr. Sarah Mitchell continued her research into the nature of the void. She had a new assignment, working with assembly scientists to develop better defenses against the swarm should they return. It was strange working alongside aliens who 50 years ago would have arrested her for entering their space. But Sarah found she enjoyed the collaboration. Different perspectives led to better solutions. Commander Alex Torres was promoted to admiral and given command of the new Joint Human Assembly Defense Fleet. He spent his days training mixed crews and developing tactics that combined human innovation with assembly resources. It was exhausting work, but it was meaningful. Chairman Victoria Cross retired after seeing humanity restored to the galactic community. She had led her people through the darkest years and brought them into a brighter future. She spent her final years on a colony world, teaching children about history and why it mattered to remember both the injustices suffered and the grace shown when vengeance would have been easier. And in the great assembly chamber, a new monument was erected. It was simple, just a plaque made of metal salvaged from human refugee ships. The inscription was written in both human languages and the major assembly tongues. They warned us. We did not listen. They suffered. They survived. They returned. Let this stand as a reminder that wisdom sometimes comes from unexpected sources, and that those we cast out may be the very ones we need most. The galaxy turned. The stars burned. And humanity, once driven into the darkness, had returned not as conquerors, but as partners. The exile that was meant to destroy them had instead forged them into something the assembly desperately needed. A people who understood survival in the void, who could face the darkness without flinching, who could fight impossible battles and find ways to win. The repercussions of driving humanity out had come, but not as the assembly had feared. Instead of revenge, humans had brought salvation. Instead of war, they had brought alliance. The greatest consequence was not punishment, but forgiveness. And in that forgiveness, the galaxy found a new path forward. The shadow swarm remained in the darkness, waiting and watching. When they eventually returned, as everyone knew they would, humanity and the assembly would face them together. Not as master and not as the powerful tolerating the weak, but as equals united against a common threat. It was not the ending anyone had expected 50 years ago when James Reeves delivered his warning. But it was an ending that proved what humanity had always believed. That survival is not about being the strongest or the oldest or the most advanced. It is about being adaptable, resilient, and willing to help others even when they do not deserve it. The galaxy had driven humanity out. Humanity had warned them. And now, facing the consequences of their choices, the galaxy had learned the most important lesson. That sometimes the greatest strength comes not from casting others out, but from bringing them in.